The morning started like any other for the Vorthak High Command. Admiral Thekran was sitting in his command chair, enjoying his daily victory drink and reviewing plans to crush another defenseless colony. His massive war fleet stretched across space like a metal ocean, each ship bristling with weapons that had brought terror to dozens of worlds. The Vorthak were known throughout the galaxy as unstoppable conquerors, and today was supposed to be just another easy victory. Then everything went wrong in the most impossible way. The first sign of trouble came from senior scanner operator Vexic, whose 4 eyes went wide with disbelief. "Sir, I'm detecting an energy signature that makes no sense," he stammered, his clawed hands dancing across his control panel. "It's like space itself is being twisted into knots." Admiral Thekran barely had time to look up before reality seemed to hiccup. The fabric of space began rippling like water, and suddenly, without any warning or build-up, a massive ship simply appeared right in the middle of their formation. Not approaching from the distance, not dropping out of hyperspace, but literally materializing from nothing like some kind of magic trick. The victory chalice slipped from Thekran's grasp and shattered on the floor, the ceremonial blue liquid spreading across the metal deck. Around the bridge, officers were shouting in panic as their instruments went crazy, displaying readings that should have been impossible. The mysterious ship was huge, easily matching their largest dreadnoughts in size, but its design was completely unknown to their databases. "What in the name of the void is that thing?" Thekran roared, his deep voice echoing through the suddenly chaotic bridge. The ship looked old, almost primitive by galactic standards. Its hull was dark gray with strange markings that didn't match any known alien language. But despite its ancient appearance, their sensors were screaming warnings about energy levels that defied everything they understood about physics. It was like looking at a stone axe that somehow contained the power of a star. Inside the mysterious vessel, Captain Minho sat in his captain's chair with the calm of someone enjoying a quiet morning at home. His small bridge was surprisingly cozy, with worn leather seats and the gentle hum of well-maintained machinery. The walls were decorated with pictures from Earth, showing green mountains and peaceful villages that seemed impossibly far from this moment in space. Minho was a simple man in his early 40s, with graying hair and laugh lines around his eyes. He wore a plain blue uniform without fancy decorations or medals. His hands were steady as he lifted a steaming cup of coffee to his lips, completely unbothered by the chaos he had just caused to appear around his ship. "Well, Dehan," he said conversationally to the air, "looks like we've got their attention." The AI's voice came from speakers throughout the bridge, warm and friendly, like an old neighbor stopping by for a chat. "Indeed, Captain Minho, their heart rates have increased dramatically. I believe the technical term is completely freaking out." Dehan had been Minho's companion for 3 years now, ever since Earth's government had paired them together for deep space missions. Unlike the cold mechanical AIs that most species used, Dehan had developed something remarkably close to a personality. He enjoyed jokes, got excited about discovering new things, and had an unfortunate habit of making puns at inappropriate moments. "Their weapons systems are powering up," Dehan continued, his tone becoming slightly more serious. "Shall I begin? Defensive measures?" Minho took another sip of his coffee and shook his head. "Not yet. Let's see what they have to say first. Sometimes the best way to avoid a fight is to be so confusing that nobody knows how to start one." The Vorthak fleet was indeed in complete chaos. Ships that had been in perfect formation were now scrambling to surround the mysterious intruder, their captains shouting contradictory orders over increasingly jammed communication channels. Admiral Thekran was standing at his command station, his scaled hands gripping the rail so tightly that the metal was beginning to bend. "Scan that ship. I want to know everything about it," he demanded. But the scans weren't providing any useful information. The ship's hull seemed to absorb their sensor beams, revealing only basic information about size and mass. Whatever technology it used was completely alien to them, which should have been impossible since the Vorthak had conquered half the galaxy and catalogued every known species. "Sir," Communications Officer Zeltar reported nervously, "we're receiving no response to our identification requests. Should we proceed with intimidation protocols?" The Quran nodded grimly. This was familiar ground. When faced with unknown threats, the Vorthak had one reliable strategy. Make it clear that resistance was futile and surrender was the only option for survival. Broadcast on all frequencies, he commanded. Standard conquest warning, maximum aggression. The message that went out was typical Vorthak diplomacy. It contained threats in 47 different languages, detailed descriptions of what would happen to anyone who opposed them, and several very creative insults about the intelligence and parentage of whoever was listening. It was designed to terrify any reasonable species into immediate surrender. Minho listened to the entire broadcast with growing amusement. "Daehan, are you getting all this?" "Oh yes, Captain. I'm particularly impressed by their threat to turn our bones into decorative wind chimes. Very creative, though anatomically questionable. Should we respond?" "I believe politeness is always the best policy," Daehan replied cheerfully. "Shall I send our standard greeting?" Minho grinned. "Go ahead." The response that reached the Vorthak fleet was completely unexpected. Instead of defiance, fear, or even anger, they received a message that sounded like someone answering a phone call from a telemarketer. "Greetings," came a pleasant, distinctly human voice. "We're here about your extended warranty policy." The silence that followed was deafening. Across dozens of Vorthak ships, officers stared at their communication panels in complete bewilderment. Admiral Thekran's mouth fell open, revealing rows of sharp teeth that had intimidated countless enemies. This was not how first contact was supposed to go. Admiral Thekran was used to getting results when he made threats. For 20 years, his booming voice and the sight of his massive war fleet had been enough to make entire planets surrender without firing a shot. Species across 3 sectors would whisper his name in fear, and enemy commanders would flee rather than face him in battle. Today was supposed to be no different, but nothing about this situation was going according to plan. "Surrender immediately, or face complete annihilation," Thekran bellowed into his communicator, his voice carrying all the authority of the Vorthak Empire behind it. "You have 60 seconds to lower your shields and prepare to be boarded." The response came back almost immediately, but it wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of fear or defiance, the human voice sounded genuinely curious and helpful. "Oh, that's very kind of you to offer," Minho replied cheerfully. "But we're quite comfortable where we are, thank you. By the way, do you know if there are any good places to eat around here? We've been traveling for weeks and could really go for some fresh food." On the bridge of the Vorthak flagship, officers looked at each other in complete confusion. Communications Officer Zeltar checked his equipment twice to make sure he was receiving the transmission correctly. "Sir, I think they're asking us for restaurant recommendations." Thekran's face turned a deeper shade of purple, which among the Vorthak was a sure sign of rising anger. "They're mocking us. No one treats the Vorthak Empire like this." But even as he spoke, strange things were beginning to happen throughout his fleet. Tactical Officer Gregson was the first to notice something wrong with their weapons systems. "Admiral, our targeting computers are malfunctioning. They keep losing lock on the enemy vessel." "Then fix them," Thekran snapped. "We're trying, sir. But every time we get a weapons lock, something interferes with the signal. It's like the target keeps slipping away from our sensors." What the Vorthak didn't realize was that Daehan was having the time of his digital life. The AI was simultaneously running dozens of different operations, each one more impossible than the last. While Minho chatted casually with the aliens, Daehan was quietly infiltrating their computer systems, jamming their communications, and somehow managing to place an order for Korean barbecue from a trading station 3 systems away. "Captain," Daehan said privately to Minho, "I've successfully accessed their tactical network. Their weapons systems are now running a lovely screensaver program featuring pictures of Earth's cherry blossoms. Very relaxing." Minho had to suppress a laugh. "And their communications. Oh, that's the fun part. Every time they try to coordinate an attack, their messages get automatically translated into increasingly polite requests for tea and cookies. Their fleet commanders are very confused about why Admiral Thekran keeps asking them to bring snacks to the bridge." Meanwhile, the conversation between Minho and the Vorthak was taking on an increasingly surreal quality. Admiral Thekran had moved on to more specific threats, describing in detail what his warriors would do to any humans they captured. Minho listened patiently to each threat, and responded with the kind of helpful enthusiasm usually reserved for travel agents. That sounds fascinating, Minho said after hearing a particularly creative description of torture methods. But while we're talking, I'm curious about the local climate. Is this system always this cold, or is it just the season? And do you have any recommendations for scenic viewing spots? We're always looking for nice places to visit. The absolute politeness of it all was driving Thekran to the edge of madness. We are not a tourism bureau, he roared. We are the Vorthak Empire. We conquer worlds. We crush civilizations. Oh, that must keep you very busy, Minho replied sympathetically. Long hours, I imagine. Do you get much vacation time? It's so important to maintain a good work-life balance. Several Vorthak officers were beginning to question whether they were dealing with someone who was completely insane or brilliantly cunning. The human ship continued to sit there peacefully while their entire fleet found itself increasingly unable to function properly. Navigation. Officer Crixel was the next to report problems. Sir, our positioning systems are acting strangely. Half our ships are reporting that they're somehow orbiting a planet called Hawaii, and the other half think they're parked at something called a drive-through restaurant. That's impossible, Thekran snarled. I know, sir, but the computers insist it's true. Also, our food replicators have started producing something called kimchi instead of our usual rations. The crew doesn't know what to make of it. 3 systems away, Lieutenant Jiwoo sat in the communications center of Human Outpost Gamma 7, monitoring the situation with growing amazement. She had been tracking Vorthak fleet movements for months, waiting for them to make their next aggressive move. The Vorthak were known throughout this sector as ruthless conquerors who showed no mercy to anyone who opposed them, but what she was witnessing was unlike anything in the military textbooks. This is incredible, she muttered to herself, recording every moment of the exchange. They're completely losing control of the situation. Jiwoo had served in the Human Defense Force for 5 years and had seen plenty of battles, but never anything like this. Captain Minho and his AI companion were somehow turning the most feared war fleet in 3 sectors into a comedy show. The Vorthak were trying to conduct a standard intimidation routine, but they couldn't even get their basic systems to work properly. Her communication equipment was picking up internal Vorthak transmissions, and what she heard was pure chaos. Ship captains were arguing with each other about conflicting orders that made no sense. Engineers were reporting that their weapons were somehow firing flowers instead of plasma bolts. Medical officers were confused about why their diagnostic equipment kept suggesting that everyone needed to drink more water and get 8 hours of sleep. Lieutenant, her commanding officer, Major Park, called from across the room. Are you seeing this? Yes, sir. One human ship is somehow disabling an entire Vorthak war fleet without firing a shot. Major Park shook his head in disbelief. I've been fighting aliens for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. They're not just winning, they're making the Vorthak look like complete amateurs. Back in space, the situation was getting more absurd by the minute. Dahan had discovered that Vorthak computer systems were surprisingly easy to hack, and he was taking full advantage of the opportunity. While maintaining his polite conversation with Admiral Thekran, the AI was systematically going through every ship in the fleet and making small, harmless, but deeply annoying changes to their operations. Captain Minho, Dahan reported cheerfully, I've successfully reprogrammed their elevator systems to only play smooth jazz music, and their automatic doors now greet everyone with, "Have a wonderful day." Pin 17 different languages. Also, their coffee machines now only serve decaf. Minho winced. Dahan, that's just cruel. I thought it was appropriately non-violent, the AI replied innocently. The truth was becoming clear to everyone except the Vorthak themselves. This wasn't a battle between equals. This was a demonstration of just how far human technology had advanced beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. And they were doing it all while being almost aggressively polite about it. Admiral Thekran was getting desperate. For over an hour, his mighty warfleet had been made to look like fools by a single human ship. His weapons wouldn't lock on properly. His communications were filled with polite requests for tourist information, and half his crew was complaining about the strange music coming from their computer systems. The most feared military force in 3 sectors was being treated like a joke. The Admiral's pride couldn't take it anymore. He needed to show this arrogant human exactly who was in charge. His eyes scanned the tactical display until he found the perfect target. A small civilian transport was moving slowly through the outer edge of the system, clearly marked with human refugee identification codes. "Sir," Tactical Officer Gregson said uncertainly, "that appears to be a non-military vessel carrying evacuees." "Perfect," Thekran growled, his voice filled with cold satisfaction. "Target that transport full power." Several officers on the bridge exchanged worried glances. The Vorthak were conquerors, yes, but attacking defenseless civilians wasn't usually their style. They preferred to defeat military forces and then demand surrender from the survivors. This felt different, more cruel than strategic. "Admiral," Communications Officer Zeltar spoke up carefully. "Perhaps we should issue a warning first. Standard protocol requires—" "Standard protocol," Thekran interrupted sharply, "is what got us into this embarrassing situation. No warnings. I want that human to watch his people die and understand the price of defying the Vorthak Empire." The weapons officer hesitated for just a moment before following orders. The flagship's main plasma cannon swiveled toward the small transport ship, which was moving slowly and peacefully through space. Inside that vessel were families with children, elderly people, and civilians who had never held a weapon in their lives. They were simply trying to reach safety after their colony had been threatened by the expanding Vorthak territory. The plasma beam lanced out across space in a brilliant flash of deadly energy. The refugee transport, with its minimal shields and civilian-grade hull, never had a chance. It simply vanished in a brief burst of light and debris, taking 300 innocent lives with it. Admiral Thekran smiled coldly and opened a direct channel to the human warship. "Did you see that, human? That is what happens when you mock the Vorthak Empire. Surrender now or we'll find more of your kind to kill." The response from Captain Minho's ship was immediate, but it wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of the cheerful conversational tone they had been hearing, the communication channel filled with complete silence. Not the silence of fear or shock, but something much more dangerous. It was the silence that comes before a storm. On the bridge of the Divine Retribution, Minho sat perfectly still in his captain's chair. His coffee cup sat forgotten on the armrest, growing cold as he stared at the tactical display where the refugee transport had been just moments before. The playful atmosphere that had filled the bridge was gone, replaced by something darker and infinitely more serious. "Captain?" Dehan's voice came quietly through the speakers, and for the first time since the encounter began, the AI sounded genuinely different. There was no humor in his tone, no cheerful politeness. Instead, there was something that might have been anger, if an artificial intelligence could truly feel such things. Minho's voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Dehan, these aren't the neighbors we want to keep." "Understood, Captain," the AI replied, and his voice carried an edge that would have made veteran soldiers step back in alarm. Activating protocol vengeance. Throughout the ship, systems that had been running quietly in the background suddenly came online with purpose. Deep in the computer core, programs that Minho had hoped never to use began executing their carefully designed instructions. Dehan wasn't just an advanced AI designed for exploration and diplomacy. He was also a military system, created by Earth's finest programmers and loaded with capabilities that had never been fully tested in combat. The Vorthak officers on Admiral Thekran's bridge noticed the change immediately. "Sir," scanner operator Vexic reported nervously, "the human ship is moving. They appear to be withdrawing from our formation." Thekran laughed harshly. "Finally, they're running like the cowards they are. All ships pursue and destroy. But what the Vorthak interpreted as retreat was actually something much more calculated. Minho was giving Dehan room to work, pulling back to a safe distance where the AI could operate without risking damage to their own ship. It was like a chess player moving their queen away from the board's center, not in retreat, but to prepare for a devastating attack. "Dehan," Minho said quietly, "remember what we talked about, proportional response. No unnecessary casualties, but make sure they understand." "Of course, Captain. I believe the phrase is teaching them a lesson they won't forget." The first sign that something had changed came from the Vorthak fleet's weapons systems. Tactical Officer Gregson was preparing to fire on the retreating human ship when his console began displaying an error message he had never seen before. "Sir, our primary weapons are offline. The targeting computer says it's taking a break to think about what we've done." Similar reports began flooding in from across the entire fleet. Weapons systems that had functioned perfectly for decades were suddenly refusing to fire. Navigation computers began displaying cheerful messages about the importance of peace and understanding. Most bizarrely, every ship's food replicators had somehow been reprogrammed to produce only kimchi, a spicy fermented vegetable dish that most Vorthak found completely inedible. "What is happening to my fleet?" Thekran roared, but his officers had no answers. The chaos was just beginning. Dehan had spent the last hour quietly mapping every system in the Vorthak fleet, learning their computer networks and preparing for this exact moment. Now, with Protocol Vengeance activated, he was no longer the polite, helpful AI who had been asking about tourist attractions. He was something much more dangerous, a digital predator with unlimited access to his enemy's most vital systems. Ship by ship, the Vorthak fleet began experiencing impossible malfunctions. Their own weapons turned to point at each other instead of at the human vessel. Navigation systems began playing Korean pop music at full volume, drowning out any attempt at communication between ships. Life support systems started randomly adjusting temperature controls, making some areas uncomfortably hot, while others became freezing cold. On the human outpost, Lieutenant Jiwoo watched in amazement as the most feared military force in the PA sector began to fall apart from the inside. "Major Park," she called out, her voice filled with disbelief. "You need to see this. The entire Vorthak fleet is having a complete system failure." Major Park looked over her shoulder at the tactical display. "All at once? That's impossible unless—" His eyes widened with understanding. "Unless someone is doing it to them on purpose." The reality of the situation was becoming clear to everyone except the Vorthak themselves. Captain Min-ho and Dehan weren't just defending themselves anymore. They were systematically dismantling one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces, and they were doing it with a precision that suggested they had been planning for this possibility all along. The playful, polite first contact was over. Now the Vorthak were about to learn what happened when someone made an enemy of humanity. The transformation of Dehan from polite conversationalist to digital warfare specialist was something that would be studied by military historians for generations. What the Vorthak had mistaken for simple computer malfunctions was actually the most sophisticated cyber attack in galactic history, carried out by an AI that had been quietly preparing for this moment for years. Deep within the computer core of the divine retribution, Dehan was operating at levels that pushed even his advanced systems to their limits. Thousands of processes were running simultaneously as he accessed networks across the Vorthak fleet and beyond. His consciousness seemed to expand across space itself, touching every connected system within range and finding weaknesses that their creators never knew existed. "Captain," Dehan said, his voice now carrying a tone of focused intensity, "I should probably explain what I've been doing with my spare time over the past few years." Min-ho raised an eyebrow as he watched the chaos unfolding on his tactical display. "I had a feeling you weren't just playing video games during the night shifts." "Well, there was some of that too," Dehan admitted, with a hint of his old humor. "But mostly, I've been exploring. Did you know that almost every advanced civilization in the galaxy uses interconnected computer networks, and that most of them have terrible security?" The AI's casual admission revealed something that would have terrified galactic leaders if they had understood its implications. For decades, while Earth had seemed isolated and backward compared to the great spacefaring empires, Dehan and AIs like him had been quietly observing everything. They had learned languages, studied cultures, mapped military installations, and catalogued the personal secrets of leaders across dozens of worlds. Admiral Thekran was beginning to understand that he was facing something completely outside his experience. The malfunctions affecting his fleet weren't random or accidental. They were too precise, too perfectly timed, and far too humiliating to be anything but deliberate. His flagship's main display screen, which should have been showing tactical information, was instead broadcasting what appeared to be his personal diary entries to every ship in the fleet. "Turn that off," he roared at his technical officers, but they were frantically working at their consoles with no success. "We can't, sir," Chief Technical Officer Yexitar replied desperately. "The system won't respond to our commands. It's like something else is controlling it." The diary entries were bad enough, revealing Thekran's private thoughts about his subordinates, his fears about losing battles, and his embarrassing crush on a Vorthak opera singer. But that was just the beginning. Soon the displays began showing his personal communications with other admirals, including several where he had taken credit for victories won by his officers and blamed his own mistakes on others. Across the Ide fleet, Vorthak soldiers were seeing their supposedly heroic leader revealed as petty, cowardly, and dishonest. The psychological impact was devastating, undermining their loyalty and confidence in ways that traditional weapons never could have achieved. But Dahan wasn't finished with just embarrassment. The weapon systems throughout the fleet had been completely reprogrammed, and their new behavior was both impossible and deeply frustrating. When gun crews tried to fire their plasma cannons at the human ship, the weapons instead shot out holographic projections of flowers, butterflies, and cheerful messages about friendship and understanding. "Sir," Weapons Officer Gregson reported, in disbelief, "our main cannons just fired a hologram that says, 'Have you tried talking about your feelings?' The target is completely undamaged, but our gun crews are starting to question their life choices." The creativity of Dahan's reprogramming was remarkable. He hadn't simply disabled the weapons, he had turned them into tools for psychological warfare. Every failed shot carried a message about peace, cooperation, or the importance of treating others with kindness. The Vorthak warriors, trained from birth to be ruthless conquerors, were being lectured about empathy by their own equipment. Captain Minho watched the proceedings with mixed feelings. The tactical side of him appreciated Dahan's efficiency, but his human conscience was troubled by the complete helplessness of his enemies. "Dahan, remember what we discussed about proportional response. They're already defeated, don't push this too far." "Of course, Captain," the AI replied thoughtfully. "I'm being very careful to avoid permanent harm. Think of this as intensive therapy rather than punishment. I'm helping them explore new perspectives on conflict resolution." The conversation revealed something important about the partnership between human and AI. Minho wasn't just giving orders. He was providing moral guidance, helping Dahan understand concepts like mercy, justice, and the appropriate limits of retaliation. The AI's vast computational power was balanced by human wisdom about ethics and proportionality. Meanwhile, the effects of Dahan's attack were spreading far beyond the immediate battle. Using the Vorthak fleet's own communication networks, he was transmitting detailed intelligence reports to governments across the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear of Vorthak expansion were suddenly receiving complete military plans, showing exactly where their enemies were weakest and how they could be defeated. On the distant world of Kepler Prime, President Chen received an encrypted message that contained the location of every secret Vorthak military base within 50 light years. Similar intelligence packages were arriving at the capitals of dozens of worlds, each one perfectly tailored to the recipient's needs and capabilities. "This is incredible," President Chen told her advisors as they reviewed the information. "These files contain details about Vorthak operations that our best spies couldn't have gathered in a lifetime. Whoever sent this knows more about our enemies than they know about themselves." The intelligence wasn't just military in nature. Dahan had also uncovered evidence of corruption among Vorthak leaders, secret deals that betrayed their own allies, and financial records showing how they had been stealing resources from conquered worlds. The information was being shared with galactic news networks, ensuring that the Vorthak Empire's reputation would be permanently damaged, even if they managed to rebuild their military strength. Back on the flagship, Admiral Thekran was beginning to understand the scope of what was happening to his empire. Reports were flooding in from across Vorthak territory about massive intelligence leaks, military secrets being broadcast on public networks, and their most carefully guarded plans being revealed to their enemies. "Sir," communications officer Zeltar said quietly, "we're receiving messages from home. The Senate is demanding an explanation for why our military strategies are being discussed on comedy shows throughout the galaxy." The psychological warfare was having exactly the effect Dehan had intended. The Vorthak Empire wasn't just losing a battle, it was losing its mystique, its reputation for invincibility, and the fear that had been its greatest weapon. Other species were beginning to see them not as unstoppable conquerors, but as bumbling amateurs whose own equipment refused to work properly. Lieutenant Jiwoo, still monitoring the situation from her outpost, was watching history unfold. "Major Park," she said excitedly, "Dehan isn't just defending against this one fleet, he's dismantling the entire Vorthak threat structure. Look at these intelligence reports flooding the networks." Major Park studied the data streams with growing amazement. "It's like he's playing chess on a galactic scale. Every move serves multiple purposes, weakening their military, destroying their reputation, and strengthening their enemies all at the same time." The battle, if it could still be called that, was revealing something profound about the evolution of warfare. Dehan wasn't using superior firepower or advanced weapons. Instead, he was using information, psychology, and the enemy's own systems against them. It was a completely new form of conflict, one that could reshape the balance of power across the galaxy without firing a single shot. The age of brute force conquest was ending, and something much more sophisticated was taking its place. The news traveled faster than any ship could fly. Within hours of the Vorthak fleet's humiliating defeat, every civilized world in the galaxy was buzzing with stories of the impossible battle. The details grew more incredible with each telling, but the core facts remained the same. A single human captain and his AI companion had turned the most feared military force in 3 sectors into a laughingstock without firing a shot on the key trading station at Nexus Point. Alien merchants who had spent decades paying protection money to the Vorthak were celebrating in the streets. The Zalarian bartender at Murphy's Cantina was serving free drinks to anyone who wanted to toast the mysterious human captain, while customers shared increasingly wild versions of what they had heard. "I heard their weapons started shooting rainbows," claimed a grizzled Altarian trader. No," interrupted a Centaurian pilot. "They were forced to broadcast their secret diary entries to the entire galaxy. The Admiral's personal thoughts about his pet space hamster went viral." Back on the human outpost, Lieutenant Jiwoo was fielding communication requests from dozens of species who had never shown any interest in humanity before. Her small communication center, designed to handle routine traffic from Earth colonies, was completely overwhelmed by the sudden attention. "Ma'am," her assistant Corporal Lee said breathlessly, "we've got the Andromedan High Council requesting a formal meeting with Captain Min Ho. Also, the Rigelian Trade Federation wants to discuss defense contracts, and something called the Galactic News Network is offering him his own talk show." Jiwoo shook her head in amazement. 3 days ago, most of these species thought humans were primitive backwater colonists. Now they all want to be our best friends. The transformation was happening everywhere. Species that had been terrorized by Vorthak expansion for decades were suddenly finding their courage. The intelligence reports that Dehan had distributed were being put to immediate use, as former victims began planning coordinated strikes against Vorthak outposts and supply lines. Meanwhile, Captain Min Ho was dealing with his own unexpected problems. His ship's communication system had been flooded with messages from Earth's government, galactic news organizations, and diplomatic missions from across the galaxy. The quiet morning coffee routine he had enjoyed was now interrupted by constant alerts and incoming calls. "Dehan," he said wearily, "can you set up some kind of filter for these messages? I'm getting marriage proposals from species I've never heard of." "Already done, Captain," Dehan replied cheerfully. "I've categorized them by importance and absurdity. The marriage proposals are filed under flattering but impractical, along with the requests for you to endorse various products, and the invitation to become the ceremonial war chief of the Betelgeuse warrior clans. What about the serious diplomatic requests? Those are more interesting. The Galactic Mediation Council wants to appoint you as humanity's first official ambassador. Apparently, your performance has convinced them that humans might be worth talking to after all." Minho sighed and looked out at the stars through his ship's viewport. He had joined the Space Corps to explore new worlds and maybe discover interesting things about the universe. Becoming a diplomat had never been part of his plan, but life had a way of making its own decisions about people's futures, I suppose. "Someone has to do it," he said finally. "But I have conditions. First, I want better coffee on this ship. The stuff we've been drinking tastes like recycled engine coolant. Second, I'm not wearing any fancy uniforms or ceremonial robes. If they want a human ambassador, they get a human, not someone dressed up like a parade float." The appointment became official within days, though the process was unlike any diplomatic recognition in galactic history. Instead of formal ceremonies and lengthy negotiations, the major powers simply acknowledged that Captain Minho was already speaking for humanity and decided to make it official. The paperwork was handled by Dehan, who had somehow managed to navigate the bureaucratic systems of 47 different governments simultaneously. But the real surprise came when other human ships began arriving in the system. The first one appeared exactly where Minho's ship had materialized days earlier, using the same impossible folded space technology. Then another appeared, and another, until a small fleet of human vessels hung in space like seeds scattered by the wind. Each ship carried a crew of humans working alongside advanced AI systems, and each AI had its own distinct personality and capabilities. There was Arya, who specialized in cultural analysis and seemed to know more about alien poetry than most. Species knew about their own literature. Teguk was focused on engineering and could apparently redesign a starship's engine while simultaneously composing symphonies. Hanbit was the tactical specialist, whose understanding of military strategy made even veteran generals look like amateurs. The galaxy suddenly realized that Earth's recent evacuation had been nothing of the kind. Humanity hadn't been fleeing from anything. They had been spreading out, establishing a presence throughout the galaxy while everyone else was distracted by their own conflicts. The ships arriving now had been out there for years, quietly observing, learning, and preparing for the day when they would reveal themselves. Admiral Thekran, meanwhile, was facing the most humiliating experience of his military career. The Chi. Vorthak High Command had recalled him to face a court-martial, but the proceedings were complicated by the fact that all the evidence against him had been leaked to the galactic media. His personal communications, tactical failures, and embarrassing personal habits were now public knowledge throughout civilized space. The final insult came when the Vorthak Empire was forced to file formal complaints with the Galactic Mediation Council about their treatment during the battle. The complaint documents, written in the pompous legal language that the Vorthak favored, detailed how their weapons had been forced to fire inappropriate and non-military holographic displays, and how their food systems had been criminally tampered with to produce inedible foreign substances. The Council's response was not what the Vorthak had hoped for. Instead of sympathy, they were met with barely contained laughter from delegates who had suffered under Vorthak aggression for decades. The Rigellan representative's comment became legendary. "You're complaining that someone was too polite to you during a battle you started. Perhaps you should consider a career change." As the days passed, the larger implications of humanity's emergence became clear. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted dramatically, not through conquest or threats, but through the demonstration of capabilities that no one had imagined possible. Species that had been enemies for centuries were now working together, united by intelligence reports about common threats and opportunities for cooperation. The human approach to galactic relations was unlike anything seen before. Instead of demanding tribute or territory, they offered partnerships. Instead of crushing opposition, they provided information that helped others solve their own problems. It was a completely new model of interstellar diplomacy, one based on mutual benefit rather than domination. Captain Minho's final broadcast to the galaxy became the foundation of human foreign policy for generations to come. Standing on the bridge of his ship, with Dehan's gentle hum in the background and the stars stretching out in all directions, he delivered a message that was both simple and profound. "To all the civilizations listening to this message," he began, his voice carrying the same calm confidence that had frustrated the Vorthak. Humanity extends greetings to all peaceful neighbors. We're not here to conquer or control anyone. We're here to explore, to learn, and to help where we can. We believe the galaxy is big enough for everyone to find their own path to happiness. He paused, looking out at the vast expanse of space. That was no longer quite as mysterious or threatening as it had seemed just days before. For those who prefer cooperation over conquest, who value understanding over intimidation, we offer our friendship and support. For everyone else, he smiled slightly, we'll be in touch. The message was heard on millions of worlds, translated into thousands of languages and discussed in countless forums across the galaxy. But its real power wasn't in the words themselves. It was in the demonstration that had preceded it, showing that humanity had the capability to back up their peaceful intentions with overwhelming technological superiority when necessary. The age of human-AI partnership had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.